distinguished speakers, dear participants, on behalf of the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program, I would like to welcome you to the session on 2021 edition of the United Nations World Water Development Report. I would like to encourage the audience to use the chat box to comment or ask questions. Now, let me introduce Mr. Abu Amani, Director of the Division of Water Sciences of UNESCO, who will open the session on behalf of the UNESCO Assistant Director General for Natural Sciences, Ms. Shamila Nair Budwell. Abu, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Michaela. I will be very brief, dear colleagues, friends, and participants. On behalf of our Assistant Director General for Natural Science Sector, I would like to welcome you all to this session dedicated to the 2021 edition of the United Nations World Water Development Report. As you all know, on valuing water, UNESCO is very pleased and honored to publish the WWDR series since 2003 on behalf, of course, of UN Water, through the capable coordination of the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program for almost now 2 decades. The 2021 edition of the report is composed of 14 chapters, including the prologue and the conclusions. The rich content of this report was produced in collaboration, of course, with many partners. We have 8 lead agencies and over 30 contributors, all members and partners of UN Water. Some of them, we are happy, are here today to discuss as speakers and panelists the content, some of the elements of the content. Of course, we don't have time to discuss all the content of the report, but at least those key elements which can be considered as take away and to be moved forward. Now, as I said, the theme is valuing water. What is valuing water? This is a tricky question. It's a very simple question, but which doesn't have a simple answer. Because we know, of course, water has value, economic values, environmental values, cultural values, spiritual value. But one of the key challenge is the measurement of that value. How are you measuring the value of water? So this is why this report really is focusing on this question. And also we believe that the response of this question will help to contribute to address the huge challenge we have been facing related to water worldwide. We all know the figures on scam to water, the lack of access to water. We all know the challenges, but I will summarize the challenges through the 3 2: too much water, too little water, too polluted water. And I believe that unfortunately, we don't have luxury of time now. We need to move quickly to solve the challenges of water in the world. And I believe that the contribution of the report on valuing water will help us to move forward in that direction. And we believe that it will contribute to accelerate the achievement of SDG 6, which we all know is off track. And we are counting on all the partners to work closely with the UN Water through the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework so that we can support member states worldwide so that they can boost the implementation of SDG 6. So let me stop here and ask you to continue moderating the session and also organizing the rest of the event. Thank you.
Thank you, Abu. Now we would like to provide some inspiration to the speakers and the audience showing an art drop video. This video has been performed by young actors of the Grupo Jobel Art for Earth, an international cultural organization of talented artists committed to raising awareness about social and environmental issues. To support art during this year of COVID, WAP has requested them to produce 4 videos addressing the different values of water according to the WWDR. This one is on economic aspect. Please.
So dumb, it automatically joined me. Okay.
For the middle schools, you know, for 3 years I tried fill in the university.
Okay, great message. Now let's enter into the content of the WWDR. As Habu highlighted in his opening remarks, 2021 edition of the WWDR is composed of 14 chapters that provide an in-depth coverage of the theme. Today, we will hear from lead authors of 3 specific chapters. I would like to give the floor first to Christian Susan from UNIDO, who will present the major findings of the chapter of UNIDO chapter focusing on energy, industry, and business perspective of valuing water. Welcome, Christian. You have 7 minutes to make a strong case. Please unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you very much, Michaela. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to share how energy industry and business is valuing water. What is our perspective? It is quite clear energy industry and business are major users of water and clearly continue to be so. According to Aquastat, industry and energy combined withdrew some 19% of the world's fresh water. And in 2012, OECD projected a 400% increase of water consumption between 2000 and 2050 for manufacturing and a 140% increase for thermal power. Let us remember that value is a social concept. It expresses how desirable we consider to have something or to use something. So it's quite clear, businesses and industries as profit maximizing entities mainly see water as a utility, which should ideally be available at a low price, in sufficient quantity, and in good quality. Energy industry and businesses predominantly consider water as a resource with a direct use cost for its withdrawal and consumption, and as a liability with treatment costs or regulatory penalties that have to be paid if wastewater is insufficiently treated. Thus, for energy industry and business, the direct use value of water is of highest importance. With energy industry and business having to progressively compete with other sectors over access to the resource, energy industry and business can be seen to attribute higher attention to properly value water. As the impacts of climate change result in water scarcity in an ever-increasing number of regions on our planet, energy industry and business progressively also have started to recognize the option value of water. It is the possibility to secure access for its use in the future. In this context, the growing business case and prospective benefits constitutes a strong pull factor for energy industry and business to properly value water. The most important points for proper valuation of water are the possibility to make better decisions for sustainable operations, the possibility to generate higher revenues and to achieve lower costs, to improve risk management and to enhance reputation. Whereby higher operating costs, supply chain disruption, water supply disruption, constraints to growth and brand damage are the most significant water-related risks. The higher cost or lower earnings and financial losses related to physical, regulatory, and reputational water risks are significant. Water-related financial company losses of $38.5 billion were noted by the Carbon Disclosure Project for 2018. Here the number might even be larger, since many companies do not disclose their water-related financial losses. And for 2019, the combined water-related risk to business values was estimated by CDB to be $425 billion. So just to provide some concrete examples, in March 2004, Coca-Cola had to suspend production at its new 12 million bottling plant in Kerala in southern India. The plant had become the focus of massive protests by local citizens. They claimed the water in their wells had either dried up and become polluted within months of the plant's opening. There are several facets to this particular case, and the causal relationship is still under dispute. Yet it clearly demonstrates the dire financial consequences that can stem from water-related risks to businesses. Another example for the costs and ramifications of pollution are two pipeline leakages. They occurred in March 2018 at Anglo American's mine in the state of Minas Gerais in Brazil. The results were the water supply of Santo Antonio de Grama community was interrupted and operation was suspended until December 2021. The incident resulted in a substantive impact of $0.6 billion on the group's earnings before interest and taxes. On the other hand, many larger corporations start to recognize the value of access to water and consequently start to adjust their investment decisions. A good example is the Unilever Clean Technology Funds for water-saving projects in water-stressed areas. First, under this fund, the payback period is increased from 3 to 5 years. This increases the number of projects that can receive funding and changes the investment mindsets. And second, a water stress factor is applied. Water saved in water-stressed sites is valued 5 times higher than where water is in abundance. And it speaks for the business too. In 2019, the amount of water abstracted by Unilever's factories was cut by 47% per ton of production as compared to 2008. The cumulative costs avoided through direct water savings driven by water efficiency improvements are over 122 million euros since 2008. UNIDO, under its transfer in values and technologies methodology, follows a similar approach. We provide technical assistance to industries to demonstrate the cost effectiveness of investments in resource-efficient, cleaner production technologies and approaches. And with a budget of $2 million for technical assistance, some $20 million private sector investment, resulting in 9.7 million cubic meter water savings per year, were leveraged in Egypt, Morocco, and Tunisia. And these investments were driven by an annual saving potential of $17 million that could be realized by industries and businesses. It's clear that only businesses that recognize the importance of natural capital for their operations can make more reliable and informed investment decisions and can better assess risks and opportunities. Therefore, companies increasingly understand the value of water to their operations, thus to expand from CSR to stewardship. And stewardship and the collective action needed across a range of actors requires a greater recognition of the value of public goods, which are generated from good water management. And most and foremost, this requires a reorientation in thinking from my water supply to our shared basin. Recognizing that water is precious and undervalued, Heineken has committed to water stewardship. Under its Every Drop 2030 water ambition, Heineken commits to water balancing. Within the local catchment area, every liter of water used in its products is balanced. Furthermore, cooperation with other water users is initiated. This has resulted in the establishment of a water alliance, the Aliansia Air in East Java in Indonesia. Stakeholders from private sector, from government and from civil society have started to implement priority measures to overcome water stress. And this will be now upscaled under Jeff-funded project, which will result in a water balancing of some 2.5 million cubic meters per year. Such approaches will be further exacerbated by new trends. The circular economy will value to the extent that each liter is reused again and again. This will result in making water itself almost become part of the infrastructure rather than a consumable resource. And looking at the fourth industrial revolution, it is anticipated to lead to increased productivity and growth, with up to 30% faster production and 25% increases in efficiency. Clearly, water efficiency will be an integral part of such developments, and recognizing water's true value will become mainstream for energy industry and businesses. Thank you very much for having given me the floor and the chance to share the perspective of energy industry and businesses on water values.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you. The next intervention focuses on financing and funding water services for valuing water. And Jason Ross of the World Bank will introduce it in a video presentation. Please.
Hello, my name is Jason Ross. I'm an economist at the World Bank and author of Chapter 10 of the World Water Development Report on financing and funding water services. And for the next 7 or so minutes, I'm going to talk about the challenges that we have with ensuring that when we make our decisions on which investments to fund and finance, that we're properly valuing water. So how do we best accomplish this? So if we were just a standard investment bank and we were seeking to make an investment, we'd look at the stream of returns of the benefits that the investment would be expected to have, and we compare that with our costs, and we choose the investment which has the best financial prospects. This is your classic cost-benefit analysis. Now, of course, when it comes to water-related investments, there's a lot more things that we need to consider. On the benefit side, there are, of course, monetary benefits. For instance, investing in irrigation systems will give farmers the ability to improve, grow different crops, increase revenues, and we can directly value that increase in revenues as part of the benefits. But there are, of course, other non-monetary benefits. For instance, investing in WASH can improve health outcomes by reducing diarrheal diseases, and these will have meaningful, important impacts. Investments in wastewater treatment plants can have significant environmental benefits. Other water-related investments can be important for political goals like reducing poverty or inequality, and for instance, improving food security. And these are things that we can't directly value monetarily, but we need to take them into account when we make our investment decisions. Now, on the cost side, there are, of course, monetary costs that we need to take into consideration, but there are also many non-monetary costs as well. These can include social and environmental costs like reduced water quality or reduced water scarcity. If our investment causes water to be diverted or over-extracted, it can also affect the opportunity cost of water itself, because water is a scarce resource, and if we use it for irrigation, for instance, we preclude its use for other things like energy production or water supply or unique resource amongst all the others on this planet. And we've gotten quite good at predicting how water moves through this cycle, though climate change is, of course, making it a lot less easy to predict. Now, the image on the right hand of the screen is probably an image that you're not as familiar with, and it's something that I call the economic water cycle. And I want to briefly walk through the cycle to demonstrate why ensuring that we value water throughout our water investments can be a bit tricky. And so water starts off in the source, be it a river or a lake, where it has many of the properties of what's called a public good, which is a good available to the public without exclusion. And as with all public goods, users get the benefits of their own use, but costs from over extraction or pollution are distributed amongst the users, and they're distributed often unequally. And that's because goods like water are susceptible to problems of free riders or the tragedy of the commons, where people can use and abuse the resource and nobody has any incentive to care for it or preserve it. And so when we make water investments, we need to account for all of these unexpected externalities that can arise here. Then in order to provide benefits to cities and to farms and to households, we need to make investments in dams and pipes and treatment systems and other infrastructure. When it comes to, for instance, water supply and sanitation, these services generally create private goods, which means that the benefits are privatized, but it also means that if prices are too high or if service is too limited, then people, and it's often the poor, can be excluded. There are other services like flood protection benefits from dams or from levees, which provide public benefits where it's impossible to exclude people, but at the same time it becomes very difficult to collect user fees to fund the upkeep of such an investment, and that can jeopardize the quality or the longevity of the investment itself. And then when we supply water to farms and cities and households, we need to keep in mind that while water is an economic good, being a critical input for all forms of economic production, it's also what's called a merits good. And this is a term that we use for goods that are considered to be so meritorious that they should be made available based on need rather than based on ability to pay. And of course, water services fit this definition because water is not only vital for one's own health, but it's also vital for public health, because giving one person access to safe water supply and sanitation can benefit many people around them. And this is where the critical question of pricing comes into play. We need to distinguish between pricing of water and valuing water because the two are not the same. However, pricing water correctly is critical for ensuring the impact and longevity of infrastructure investments for at least three reasons. First, there are costs with maintaining and operating these investments, which need to be paid for. And it's a common result that when fees are paid by users rather than through government subsidies, service is a lot more reliable. This is particularly true when it comes to WASH. There are much better outcomes when utilities are beholden to their users to generate their revenues rather than from politicians to supply government funding. Second, pricing can be an important way to limit the overuse of water for both domestic water use as well as for irrigation. When water is free, it tends to be overused, it becomes scarce, and access, especially for the poor, can decline. And we often see that free water is the most expensive for the poor because they lose access and then they need to turn to alternatives like bottled water or water that's trucked in from other areas, and this can be very expensive. However, we need to be careful because if the price is too high, then you can end up also limiting access. And that's why it's critical that we provide subsidies for the poor to ensure that they have access. Again, though, this needs to be done very carefully. A recent World Bank study showed that of all the subsidies in the water and sanitation sector, 56%, so more than half, were captured by the richest 25%, the richest 20% of the population, whereas only 6% were captured by the poorest 20%. And this is not only a problem for addressing the issue of access, but it's also a waste of scarce public funds. So we need to be very cautious when we design and we reform these subsidy schemes. So given all this, what does it mean to properly value water in our investment decisions? It means that when we prioritize investments, we need to make decisions which recognize all of the benefits provided by water, the benefits that cover economic, social, and ecological dimensions. It means that we need to account for both the public benefits as well as the private benefits. It means accounting for the negative externalities that water might generate. And it also means making certain that the benefits of water infrastructure are maximized by ensuring that they are properly funded and maintained, and that we couple them with smart regulations and fair prices. Critically, valuing water does not necessarily mean pricing water, though just an equitable pricing of water can be one useful tool to ensure that it is valued. And only when we account for all of this can we prioritize projects that will bring the most benefits to the most people. Thank you.
Thanks, Jason, for showing the complexity of the economic perspective. But now let's look to the other side of the coin, the cultural values of water. Alexander Otte from the Intergovernmental Hydrological Program of UNESCO will introduce us to this holistic perspective. Alex, you have 7 minutes sharp, please.
Thank you very much, Michaela, and thank you for the opportunity to present this chapter here at the Stockholm World Water Week. It's really a pleasure and an honor at the same time. And I would like to start actually by thanking also the co-authors of this chapter, Culture and the Values of Water, David Coates and Rick Connor, and all the contributors to the chapter that have made it possible to publish on the subject in a report that is actually rather tainted in the direction that we have been hearing before, even though it's quite remarkable how complex the social and environmental issues have been analyzed, or in their complexity. What I would like to underline is basically that I don't consider really culture as the other side of the coin. It's more, if you want to coin it in those terms, it's a wallet in which all this is actually being contained. If we take the definition of UNESCO for culture, it's actually the set of distinctive spiritual, material, intellectual, and emotional features of a society or a social group. And it encompasses, in addition to art and literature, lifestyles, ways of living together, value systems, traditions, and beliefs. And actually, we are precisely talking about those value systems in all their complexity here. And it's also culture that has brought about the value systems that are driving technical or financial approaches or scientific approaches to water. The multiple values are quite clearly represented in the report, notably through a rather complex graph, which I would nevertheless like quickly to show, and just to highlight the main boxes that we have seen here when we are talking about what are cultural benefits of water, for instance. So we have the benefits of environmental spaces, those places, localities, landscapes, and seascapes. They are important for people where they interact with each other, but also with the natural environment. We have the cultural practices, the places, localities, the cultural practices which include rather the expressions, the symbolic and interpretive interactions with people and the natural environment. We do have the benefits directly to human well-being that are derived from those waterscapes, or also from the direct interaction with water itself, in particular also in its natural state, but also through rituals. For instance, baptisms or water rites that are practiced all over the world, but also in festivals and similar, practices, but also expressions of artistic nature, we would say. And then we have the cultural goods, the interactions between values, services, and benefits that are potentially amenable to market transactions. And creating cultural goods based on water is obviously one of the key economic factors, even if we count in, for instance, agricultural goods or industrial goods, which are, I would argue, also in the end an expression of certain cultures. So if we look from this basis of cultural values on or cultural benefits, we can come to the conclusion that culture generates values and directly influences how they are perceived, derived, and used. And every society, group, or individual exists in its own dynamic cultural setting. So it's a huge diversity that we're dealing with. And the background for those cultural values differs with each of the societies that we're looking at. So in some cultures, values can be very difficult to quantify because sometimes even to articulate, because they only exist in the specific cultural expression, but they change also. So we look at something that's dynamic. And the values of water would need to be understood as difficult to categorize, but it is possible. As we have seen, there are tentatives, which makes them also very difficult to measure or to shape into tools. So therefore, we need to look very clearly at developing and perhaps sharpening those tools when we get to developing solutions for the future. Because despite we are regularly defying any attempt of quantification of cultural values, we really can consider them among the highest values that we can find attributed by a society to water. So where do we go from here with those conclusions? It's not very easy to coin something that fits basically to each and every society. That certainly is not possible. But we can work in intensifying the dialogue, for instance, between different value holders in order to bring together science and culture, for instance, and with the help of arts. And I must say that this dialogue and the integration of culture is in this case not a nice to have, it's a must have, because otherwise we've seen that many solutions just don't function when they are not integrated in cultural context or into the value environment of a culture. So just to finish on a few examples where UNESCO is now taking this matter up in terms of giving it a practical spin. One of the opportunities we have with UNESCO are the designated sites, for instance, World Heritage Sites, very well known, biosphere reserves, but also geoparks. We are also working with less known experimental sites on ecohydrology. So what we are doing is we are trying to bring those sites together in a way that we will combine their outstanding value with a scientific analysis and the recognition by the people that they're inhabiting them. So the UNESCO Earth Network has recently been launched at the G20 on the environment. It's a case in point of how to include the work of different fields of understanding water in order to find solutions that we can apply also in the current even more dire situation. So I'll leave you with those takeaway messages on the screen that are in fact summarizing very well not only the report but also the way how cultural values will need to be included in order to find sustainable solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. Your messages are very true, very true, and also challenging, and UNESCO knows it very well. So I think we are running a little bit late, so I think that we need to skip the second video and move directly to the panel discussion. So I would like to hand over the floor to Ms. Kellyanne Naylor, who is the Associate Director for Water, Sanitation and Hygiene in UNICEF and Vice Chair of UN Water. So Kellyanne, thank you for accepting to moderate the panel, and over to you.
Thank you so much, Michaela. Dear colleagues, it's such a pleasure to be here with you today. And it's so exciting to see that this session is dedicated to the 2021 edition of the United Nations World Water Development Report. This is a long-standing publication, is UN Water's flagship report on water and sanitation issues, which has a different theme every year. UNESCO publishes it on behalf of UN Water, and it's coordinated by the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program. So really like to thank UNESCO and the numerous co-organizers who are also contributors to this year's report on valuing water. I think this next part of the session is really about taking stock of the impact of the 2021 report. And I think, as we've heard, it's been fascinating to see how we can bring together the different components of the World Water Development Report with its science-based and factual foundation, which really comes together in perfect harmony with something that many of us are involved with the World Water Day campaigns, which are always on the same theme, but with more social overtones. And this synergy, I think, not only creates ripple effects in the water domain, but also really sparks discussions with other sectors and engaging the public beyond our tight-knit community of water professionals. So kind of carrying on with this water metaphor of a ripple effect, I think it really ties us to what we're trying to do together around acceleration. And earlier this year, UN Water published the SDG 6 progress report that showed that the required action around some of the SDG 6 targets is going to be up to 4 times the current rate of progress. And it's really in this context that we have come together to use and develop the SDG 6 Global Acceleration Framework to mobilize action across government, civil societies, the private sector, and the UN. And I think we're really trying to use this framework as a way of driving action and have it be something that all different parts of SDG 6 and different stakeholders can contribute to. But I think really making the links between SDG 6 and acceleration and the raison d'etre of the UN Water Report, it really demonstrates how we bring together expertise across the whole UN family under the coordination of UNESCO to really see how we can produce this report year after year together. So this year's topic particularly lent itself to an even wider lens, and I think really looking at the value that we place on water, depending on who is using it, for what purpose, and that this value can really help us towards better and efficient use of water, which we've heard from the speakers today. So we really wanted to reach out with this campaign to ask one simple question: what does water mean to you? And so this effort with the World Water Day campaign that was coordinated by FAO, Aquafed, and PSI International, supported by the UNESCO World Water Assessment Program and 14 other members. And this campaign generated over 6,000 conversations in 140 countries, where the 20 most active countries were in Africa. While the financial value of water, the price people pay, the cost, the investments was discussed, many conversations were also associated with the other values of water for health, culture, and spiritual practices based on governance and policy aspects. Indeed, I think we'd all agree that water runs through so many aspects of life and society. And so this brings us to our debate today. And we're really pleased to see that we've got 4 panelists who are absolutely perfect for this task. So we're lucky to have with us this incredible diverse panel of leading thinkers and doers in the water sector. We have Carolina Tornesi McKinnon, who is the president of the World Youth Parliament for Water and a young water professional. We have with us Yolanda Lopez Maldonado, who is an Indigenous scholar with extensive experience on social and ecological systems and expertise on Indigenous knowledge. We have with us James Dalton, the director of the Global Water Program at IUCN, and Pedro Araujo Agudo, who we all know is our UN Special Rapporteur on the human rights to water and sanitation. So to get us started, I really want to just ask our panel members just a quick round. In a single word or sentence, what does water mean to you? And we'll just go quickly in the order, Carolina, Yolanda, James, and Pedro, just a single word or a sentence. What does water mean to you? Carolina, over to you.
Hope.
Yolanda?
The foundation of life on Earth.
Life on Earth, thank you. And James?
Not just due to my job, but income for people.
Okay, and Pedro?
Water is above all the blue soul of life on the planet.
Thank you so much. And I think we can see, yes, even within our panel, we've got, a tremendous diversity and scope of what water means to us. So let's move into our questions now. And Carolina, I'm going to start with you. And one topic that came up in the online conversations is the link between water and climate change. This was both on an individual level about the impact from personal actions that we can take, but also on a policy level. Climate change is a topic that I think many of us, it's not just because I'm from UNICEF, that we associate as a special concern for youth and young people. We might have seen Greta's op-ed in the New York Times last week that she called the climate crisis a children's rights crisis, and that adults are failing children and young people. So with this in mind, what are your thoughts on the link between climate change, valuing water, and youth? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Kellyanne, for the important question and the opportunity to be here to speak and lend a youth perspective on this topic. I think climate change is without a doubt a central focus for many young people today due to its impact on our future and the futures of generations to come. I think the link between water and climate change is fairly clear. Although global climate change can take many forms, many would agree that it's most obviously manifests itself via changes in water, specifically weather patterns involving water. Within the last year alone, the world's witnessed intense fires brought on by severe drought in Australia and the Western US, alongside life-threatening floods and storms in Asia, two opposing dangerous sides of the same coin. And these types of water-related catastrophes also shed light on the extent of damage that climate change can cause, the resources required to respond, and unfortunately, the current lack of infrastructure and preparedness shared by all nations for extreme weather events. Disasters like these place tremendous strain on global resources, particularly water, and they occur more frequently. So too does the risk they pose to people across the world. Today's youth have seen and felt the effects of climate change personally and quickly in their lives, witnessing numerous unpredictable flash floods, just like the ones that devastated parts of Western Germany and Belgium just this last month, reading reports of countries nearly reaching day zeros, and hearing about hottest days on record year after year. The statement, "It never used to get this hot here," is all too familiar for young people as the global temperature rises. In the recently released IPCC report, humans are cited as unequivocally driving climate change, directly putting pressure on water resources and causing water emergencies. But that doesn't mean we can't change what will happen next. We need to come together and make bold changes, whether they be to our daily lives through individual action like reducing our waste and conserving water, or through concrete policy changes that have broader reaching impact. And better yet, we could do both. Young people are motivated, eager to learn, and capable of contributing to and spearheading the changes we need for a sustainable future. We just need to be a part of the decision-making process on global and local levels. I hope that we can work together to make sure that the generation that will be most impacted by climate change policy also has a hand in shaping it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carolina. I think we've really heard your call to action, and also the important role that young people have as agents of change and leaders, and the call to participate in decision making, which I think is really a critical part of the process in terms of our accountability on these important issues. So thank you so much for that intervention. Now we're turning to Yolanda. And Yolanda, I think we've all heard that protecting water is everyone's responsibility. But Indigenous people are particularly known to be custodians of the natural resources in the territories where they live. And many Indigenous communities have had long-standing traditions of caring for and relating to nature. They've developed reliable, crucial, and vast accumulated knowledge of the Earth's processes and its protection, and have their own methods and approaches to be able to understand Earth systems and environmental change. We also know that they have learned to manage resources from ancestors that is much more aligned with Mother Nature's way of doing things. And, we've heard that this is really across cultures. And I think Alexander shared with us some of the examples around the world of these cultural values of water. So really, we would appreciate, since you are both an accomplished scholar on this issue and also yourself being a member of an Indigenous community in Mexico, we would really value your insights on Indigenous methods to manage water and what we can learn from these practices. Over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much for such a great session and for this very welcome presentation. In terms of how Indigenous communities value water, I would like to emphasize here that there are, of course, different conservation values. We have heard about how it's important to have this perspective of the green economy or the circular economy, and perspectives about financial issues around how water. So there are different conservation values. Governments want to protect water because they need to develop the policies around that. Indigenous peoples want to protect water resources because they use for their daily living, their livelihoods. But all those different values can overlap perfectly, so they don't need to be apart. And the main point here is how to bring all those different values together in a space of dialogue and with reciprocity and in a respectful manner. So what I think one of the issues that are missing in this game is that all those different perspectives need to consider that water hydrological much of the research on fresh water follows hydrological science traditions, but we need to consider that water is a resource that must be analyzed from a different perspective, in which social values, cultural values are also bring together, and this requires a different analysis, but not only from scientific perspectives, also considering, for example, different paradigms of how other societies relate to water. So I can give the example of Indigenous communities in Mexico, particularly in the south of Mexico, in the Yucatan Peninsula, in where the Mayas, one of the most complex and ancient civilizations in the planet, flourished. So the Mayas were a water-oriented society. Everything was related to water. For example, there are still some ceremonies carried out in that region to ask to the gods of rain for water to have better harvest for the next year. So everything was related to water. The Mayan communities were placed near to groundwater reservoirs because the area is very dry. It's like a difficult area to make a living because the weather conditions. So the methods and the way in which Maya and indigenous communities from the past, but also in the present, relates to water is in a way in which nature is respected, in which there are also aspects of, for example, sacred sites in which water is placed. We have, for example, in Yucatan, some groundwater caves, and those caves are for the communities there are sacred. So there are some spiritual and cultural values related to nature. And this goes hand by hand to the scientific approaches. So I hold a PhD and I learn a lot about how the hydrological system functions and how groundwater is flows all over the system. But also I learned from my ancestors that water must be protected, water is a crucial resource, and is the foundation of human life on Earth. So I think both are complement each other, both traditions, but also all the different values that can be bring to the table.
Hey, Yolanda, thank you so much. And I really think that example that you gave just really illustrates, as you said, kind of this importance of bringing our values together with respect, even if we're coming from different paradigms, different analytical frameworks, that we can find joint solutions. I think that's really an important takeaway. So thank you so much, Yolanda. And now, James, over to you. You provoked us with the value for water, for you being income. So just the question we have here is, water is life for the environment and ecosystems. This came up over and over again in the report. It came out loud and clear in the discussions. And perhaps this wasn't surprising. I think many of us would respond that way. But there was a level of detail which said that the restoration of wetlands is an important measure of adaptation. This one surprised us. So what do you think? And do you see this as a potential area that could accelerate action on SDG 6 and beyond? Over to you.
Great, thanks, Kellyanne. I'll be rapid because I'm conscious of time, but yes, so I mean, I think we all recognize that the environment plays a central role in the water cycle, and therefore it's a central role in river basin management. That shouldn't be a surprise to people, although unfortunately it often is. I think recognizing, quantifying, and investing in ecosystems that supports the underlying functioning of a river basin system rather than purely extracting water from it. And changes in that structure and condition of the environment obviously leads to changes, therefore, in the location, the quantity, the amount, the timing of water available to people and for what we need it for. So the condition of it is therefore critical. Restoration of wetlands and peatlands is a really important part of that puzzle because they form a critical part of our environment, but they only occupy a very small part of our planet. So peatlands only covers about 3% of the planet, for example, but they store twice as much carbon as the global forest cover. And therefore they're a major ally in climate change adaptation and mitigation because they store water, they clean water, and they store carbon. So they have a multifunctional element to our way of tackling both climate security and water security. We've lost about 35% of the global wetland coverage since 1970. And yet these are critical ecosystems. The annual rates of loss are increasing. So we must protect these systems, not because they're just there, but because they are a critical ally. Whilst we run around planting forests to store carbon, at the same time, we're draining the most effective ecosystems to store carbon at the same time. So there's, as a society, we're not generally really following some real simple scientific logic there. And I think one of the key issues, you mentioned the SDGs, a key issue is that we shouldn't forget wetlands are critical to achieving not only SDG 6 and the others, but they also contribute directly to about 75 indicators across the Sustainable Development Goals. So one type of ecosystem hits across the SDGs, and we don't invest in them in the same way as we do, for example, infrastructure. So I think it's critical to quantify those ecosystem values and services and to put them onto the planning agenda for economic analyses, and then use those to improve decision-making, to protect the natural system, to support the built system and the social system that we've created for ourselves. And therefore, whilst tools have expanded rapidly in the last 20 years, we need more of that in the planning process and the decision-making steps that we take. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, Dave. Thank you so much. And I love thinking of peatlands and wetlands as our allies. I really, that's a great takeaway. Thank you so much. Pedro, time is not on our side here. And I know you always have so much wisdom to share with us. We're at a critical moment. We're faced a pandemic, we're facing a climate crisis. So how can we really make sure that we have an approach to building back better, so that human rights is central to our approach in a way that we can implement on the ground with perseverance and greatest impact? Over to you.
Well, thank you, Kelly. Well, the pandemic has exposed vulnerability of all people and forced us to undertake a collective response. The option of shielding borders to restrict risks to remote countries, as was done, in fact, with other diseases, did not work this time. The virus traveled by plane, even business class. Other vulnerabilities greatest, of course, in impoverished population. No one will be out of danger until we can get everyone under cover. This is why, for the first time, the motto "Leave no one behind" is felt and imposed as inescapable. What had been 1,000 times argued evidence the role of water and sanitation services as a basic piece of public health has become urgent and inescapable to ensure effectiveness in the fight against the virus. This had led many governments to ban cuts of service for non-payment as an emergency measure in the face of the pandemic. Now, it would be necessary to transform this urgent need into a permanent virtue by establishing this prohibition on cutting off water to poor families as an expression of the human rights at stake, pandemic or not pandemic. On the other hand, general consensus is growing on the need to strengthen public health systems as non-profit public efforts that seek to protect the health of all, I insist, leaving no one behind. This is also growing evidence on the need to integrate under this consensus water and sanitation services, prioritizing the corresponding public and economic efforts to empower local and community authorities in their competencies in water and sanitation. In this context, talking about the financial gap to meet the SDG 6 as an argument to promote the financialization of water services is not acceptable from my point of view. In the 2008 crisis, under the austerity strategies that were imposed, this argument favored the privatization of water and sanitation services. Today, fortunately, the strategy to cope with the pandemic and post-pandemic relies on huge public funds. Even for socioeconomic revival with the Green New Deal, so-called Green New Deal, it is therefore feasible and necessary today to dedicate a significant part of these public funds available to strengthen public health systems and water and sanitation services as a democratic imperative and not as a business opportunity. Assuming that we must guarantee safe drinking water and sanitation for 2.2 billion impoverished people, without guaranteed access to safe drinking water, and 4.2 billion without sanitation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Pedro. And I think that was a great way to round up the panel. And Michaela, over to you. I think we have 1 minute. Over to you. Oh, you're unmuted.
Yes. Thank you very much, Kellyanne. It was an excellent panel. To conclude, I would like to thank all the speakers, panelists, and the audience for their participation and engagement in the session. The World Water Development Report showed with evidence that valuing water is a complex matter, but it remains an absolutely necessary step in addressing water-related challenges worldwide. So we have to join forces to make it happen, and the future of our planet and people depends on it. Thank you very much and enjoy the World Water Week.